Hi, it's Sandy from Sandy Over 70. And yes, I had 17 blind dates when I had decided to start dating again after I became a widow. And if you're thinking, oh, I could never do that, well, yes, you can if you want to. And if you'd like to know how I did it, stay tuned. I had been married for 25 years, and when my husband unexpectedly died, it threw me into the throes of grief. And as I was coming out of it, I decided that I did not want to spend the rest of my life alone. I had visions of dying in my bed and no one finding the body, because I don't have children, and so I really, really felt alone in the world. So I started exploring the online dating sites, and there were a lot of them. The first one I tried was eHarmony because they had some really good advertising on the television, and it sounded like they were just a little elevated above the others. And I did meet several people, and I'll tell you about not all, but some of the men I met. But let me just say that for me, eHarmony didn't work well because at the time I was living in a very small town, and there just weren't enough men on eHarmony within an hour or two's drive from me because it's a smaller organization than, let's say, Match.com, which is huge. So after a while, I did switch to Match.com, and I explored some of the free sites, but I was not impressed with them at all. Basically, they were a free-for-all, and I didn't like them at all. But, they work for some people, and there's one called, I don't know, Silver something, for older people. And I looked at that, and again, it's just too small of a population if you live in a small town. If you're in Chicago or New York, probably it would be fine. But those smaller sites did not work for me, and I ended up mostly using Match.com. To begin with, I had to fill out a lot of questions on all of the sites that I used, and I had to post photos. And fortunately, I had a lot of current photos because that's what you really need to post. If you post something that doesn't look like you and then you meet the person, it's not going to be good because they're going to think you lied about yourself. So I was very honest. I put all of the photos up that were current. I used a variety of photos to show that I had traveled a lot, and close-ups and full-length bodies and that sort of thing. And I would read the bios that were sent to me or just scan the photos. And I did make contact with some of the men. Now, you don't have to directly make contact with them. You can, or you can just indicate with a little icon that they have on the sites that you're interested, and see if the man is interested after looking at your profile, and then he will contact you. And that's kind of easier because you don't risk rejection. You just put a little heart or whatever they have on the site to say, I've read your bio and I'm interested, you can contact me. I do remember vividly my first date. And of course we met, I believe I would suggest coffee or maybe lunch in a restaurant. And that's exactly where my first date was. We were in a booth, and I met the man, and he was very awkward. I wasn't comfortable with him. He didn't make good eye contact, and he just seemed extremely uncomfortable. His wife had died 2 years ago, and I was leaning toward men who were widowed rather than divorce, because that's what I was, and I thought we would have something in common. I didn't think it went well at all, and I thought, well, we had a little bit of a conversation, we had a cup of coffee, and that's it, except that he did contact me again, and we ended up exchanging cell phone numbers and texting each other. It was really strange. We texted each other for months, and we became supportive to each other in our quest to find a date. We knew that it wasn't going to work out between us, but we were kind of in the same boat, and several times a day we would text each other, and if we were down on that day, the other person would do a little pep talk. So it was really interesting, and he really helped me. I think we had dinner or lunch maybe 2 or 3 times in person, but the rest of the time was texting. So that was a valuable contact, even though it didn't turn out to be a permanent relationship. So that was one person. And I will say that out of the 17 men I met, there were 3 that I was interested in seeing again. And there was one who was rude, and the rest, honestly, I don't really remember very well. I met many of them in the coffee shop at the grocery store. It was bright, it was light, I felt safe, and I knew that the date wouldn't last very long if I didn't want it to. Many of the men were still grieving the loss of their wives, and they just really were having a hard time talking to me or to even consider dating. So it was sad sometimes. So I'll tell you about the 3 men that I considered seeing again, and the one man who was rude. Let me start with the rude man, because it was a very unusual situation, and it only happened once. This man I met at a restaurant for lunch, and when I arrived in my car, I pulled up to the front of the restaurant, and he was sitting on the bench. I got out of my car, and usually a man will get up and greet you, but he kept sitting there, and he just looked me up and down and didn't smile and didn't greet me. I had to say, hello, how are you? And right away I wanted to turn around and get back in the car. But I went in and had lunch. Oh my. Well, he talked about himself the whole time. I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I knew this was going nowhere, and I wanted out of there, and he kept talking. Finally, I said to the waitress, could you bring the check, please? I grabbed the check. I paid it just so I could leave, and he was pretty surprised. Walked me to the car and had the audacity to say, when would we get together again? I looked at him like, I don't think so, And I got in the car. When I got home, he had emailed me and wanted to know why I didn't want to see him again. I thought it was pretty obvious. Well, it was obvious to me. And I thought I could ignore the email or I could tell him. And so I described his behavior, about the way he didn't greet me and how I didn't think we had anything in common. I was pretty blunt, but I figured maybe it would help him with his next date. And I never heard from him again. That was the worst experience I had. I mean, all the other 16 men were very polite. One gave me flowers, a vase of flowers. I didn't even know him. I was like, wow, how kind is that? So in that respect, I didn't have any bad experiences. That was just an awkward one. Now let me go to the men that I did see again. The first man I liked, we were bantering back and forth in our messaging, and we seemed to be getting along. His wife had died, but he just wasn't over her at all. And he kept talking about her. And I thought, oh, I don't know. I mean, like, she walked on water. He told me the whole story, how they met. It was an amazing story. And I should have known that if they're that still in love with their late wife, they're not going to be able to date anyone. No one's going to look good. So he never asked to meet me. And finally, after a long time, it seemed a long time, I asked to meet him. And reluctantly, he did. And the lunch went fine. And I thought, you know what? He really likes me. He's getting all blushy. He's blushing and he's nervous. And he looked like he really liked me. But when we talked about it in our messages afterwards, after the meeting, he said, no, it wasn't going to work with us. And I said, I can't believe it. I said to him, you acted like you really liked me. No, it's not going to work. So that was the end of that. And I really think he wasn't ready. Okay, the next one I met, he was also still grieving. I think his wife had died 2 years before. And he was just sad and talked about her in glowing terms. She was perfect. He seemed to have specific criteria for what he was looking for in a future partner and a checklist, so to speak. And I didn't have a checklist. I just knew in my gut if I met the right person, I would know. I did not have a checklist, but apparently he had a checklist. And we talked quite a bit. We went on several dates, once to a dog park, once he took me to the theater. He took me to a restaurant, and finally I took him to a dinner. And after the dinner, he wrote me in message and said it wasn't going to work. And I was pretty upset. He said that we didn't have anything in common and that I liked to travel and cruise, and he didn't even own a passport, and it wasn't going to work. And at the time, I was extremely upset because I was attracted to this guy. And now that I look back, he was absolutely right, and I thank him. He was absolutely right. He was retired from the Special Forces. He was athletic. He was a hiker. He was not interested in traveling. I liked theater. He did not. It would not have worked. And he had the sense to stop it right there. And I like I said, I do thank him for that, because it wasn't much later that I met the third and final person that I eventually married. And so we did exchange messaging, and after a while we talked on the phone. He was different from anyone else. He was extremely polite. He wasn't rushing anything. And after, I think, the second phone call, he said, well, this seems to be going pretty well. Do you think you'd like to meet? And I said, okay. And so we agreed to meet at the Asheville Arboretum, which actually turned out to be not a good location because it was really far for both of us. It was an hour and a half, at least for him, and an hour for me. But it turned out to be a very nice date. We had lunch in the cafe. We walked on the trails, and I really liked him. And so that was the beginning of our relationship. And he was definitely different from any of the others. And I felt an instant connection. And I knew that this was the man I wanted to see more of. So I'm going to stop there and just say this about online dating. If you think you can't do it, that's ridiculous, because you can do anything you want to if you set your mind to it. The question is, do you really, really want to meet someone? Or are you doing this just to test the waters and feel it out? Because if you're doing it to just test the waters and feel it out, you're probably going to be disappointed because your heart isn't into it. And the men you meet are going to sense that right away, that you're not serious. If you're scared, I can say that there are all kinds of safeguards, and they will tell you never to give out your address, your telephone number, anything. You don't even use your real name until you're ready to tell them your real name. So there are safeguards, and you have to use common sense. I did have one experience. I never met the man, but it was an experience that could have gone very badly. And it's a lesson for me to share with you. And I'll do that another time in another video. But right now, I just wanted to tell you about the people I did meet. And also, why did I go on 17 blind dates? And why didn't I stop at 10? Well, this is why. The pharmacist that I met told me, he said, I've been on a couple of dozen dates and I haven't met anyone. And at this time I was nowhere near 17. And I thought, wow, is that how much it takes for a man even? He's gone on 24 dates and no one has looked good to him. And I thought, well, I think if he can do that, I can do that. And I'm going to set that as my goal before I give up. At that point, if nothing has happened, I'll reevaluate. I didn't think I would stop because I was willing to go to 100 if I had to. But I thought, that's where I'll stop and reevaluate. So needless to say, as the numbers mounted, it didn't concern me in the least because, my goodness, there's a lot of men out there. Millions. And we are trying to find one that is compatible with us. How could you possibly expect to find that person in 1 or 2 dates? It's just not reasonable. It could happen, of course. I had a hairstylist once who was in her early 20s, and she had gone on Match, and the first man she met was a match, and she was in love. And I said, oh my goodness, that's just wonderful. Maybe it happens more often with the young people. I don't know, but I would say don't expect that when you're in your 60s and 70s. But something can happen. You have to want it. You have to persevere, and you have to look at it like this. I have a lot of free time. I'm retired. I'm a widow. What else am I going to do with my time? I can certainly have a cup of coffee or a lunch with a man who is also looking for someone and spend an hour or so with someone. It's not going to hurt me, and it may even enrich my life or change my life. Have you tried online dating? I hope you've had a good experience. I'd love it if you would share your experiences in the comments below so that others can hear what you have to say. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, click the notification button, and give me a thumbs up if you found this video to be at all helpful. Thanks and have a great day.